So while we've already done a fair amount of speculating on Splatoon 3 so far with what little we know, one thing I did want to actually talk about, and something that we actually do know that is occurring to some degree, are maps being ported to Splatoon 3. After the announcement, there was this sort of job application or opening that was being talked about on Twitter about how they're looking for people to work on map designs and balance and things like that. And one of the things included was talking about porting maps. So I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about Splatoon 1 maps that I actually want to see come back and actually appear in Splatoon 3, give my thoughts, and sort of like a tier list for these maps, and to get an idea of what the ones I want and the ones I don't want. So without further ado, let's actually just jump right into it with the tier that I'm calling Already Got Ported. And that's simply what it is. They're maps that already got ported into Splatoon 2, and that I would kind of like to not see in Splatoon 3, but I'll go into this a little bit more. But just so you know, these guys are actually already in their own tier and will be talked about later. So let's start with the highest tier going all the way down, and we're going to start out with the S tier, already with what will probably be seen as a hot take. My S tier is literally only Hammerhead Bridge. Now, there's probably some people getting ready to type up in the comments about how bad Hammerhead Bridge was, but hear me out. And I want to also preface this whole list is my own opinion. I actually would be interested in hearing other people's opinion, but as we go forward, it's obvious that you should take it a little bit of a grain of salt, as this is my opinion. But basically, the reason why I think Hammerhead Bridge should come back, and is actually in my highest tier, is that it actually fundamentally changes how the game is played. It is the only map between both games where a focus isn't on the ground. Most of Hammerhead Bridge is actually on the bridge, the grates, unequal surface. So the whole map design and the way it's made is fundamentally the game upside down, where having just paint on the ground isn't the whole focus. You can't just win the game by having the whole map there. You have to have ink on the ground and presence on the grates. And there have been plenty of times in tournaments even where my team has won just because we played the grates better than the other team. Bridge has pretty much always been seen as a not so good map. A lot of people weren't big on the map because of this sort of design choice, but I've actually always been a fan of it because it was fundamentally different. And even in Splatoon 2, nothing has come close to being so drastically different that this basically changes the entire playstyle of the game, where you could be fine with just having your side of the map and then never painting the other side of the map. It's so drastically different that I think that it deserves to come back, because still to this day it is the only map that has changed how the game is fundamentally played. Dropping down into A tier, we actually have two maps here, and this is probably a bit more questionable. My starting in A tier, I actually have Flounder Heights. Now, for those that don't know, Flounder Heights was actually close to being in Splatoon 2, but it just didn't end up making it. The real reason why I like this map is, well, of course, for those that don't know, I was a big Octobrush player in the first game, and this map is actually really good for it, and really good for short range to begin with. This is also the most notorious anti-sniper map that Splatoon 1 ever had. And if you weren't aware, snipers like, well, the Chargers, I don't know why I said snipers, things like E-Leader were actually super dominant in the first game, and this was the one map where any Charger player would not play Charger, or teams would just sub out their Charger player. There wasn't any real good vantage points. The only real good sniping spot on the entirety of this map didn't even remotely come close to being able to fight the zone. So it made it to where most Chargers didn't like playing this map, and those that wanted to play on the map ended up having to adapt to some of the weird ways that the map actually worked. So it was definitely an interesting map in terms of playing into it as a Charger. It was a good map for short range in a game where a lot of the maps were very range focused. So having a map that actually allowed short range to excel was pretty good. The only real gripe I had with Flounder Heights is that it was a two-zone map that didn't need to be a two-zone map. It was like literally a hop skipping away from the other zone, and I felt like that should have been different. And if they bring it back, maybe they could just make it a single zone map. Just merge the two roofs together and make one really long zone. But the way it was, I didn't quite understand why it was just a double zone map. Next up is Mahi Resort, which is still the only real transforming stage the game has, if you exclude the shifty stations that include transformations, like the Thunderdome. But it is still the only map that actually full-on transforms over the course of the match. And while it certainly suffered from being on the Wii U, when the change on the map would occur, the game would stutter a little bit and the frame rate would drop. But it was still the only map that did that and made it unique enough that I'm actually surprised it didn't make it into the sequel. Enough people actually really enjoyed the map. The Splat Zones was probably one of the most interesting ones, the better received one. The Tower Control and Rainmaker were a bit of a clown fiesta, but Splat Zones and Mahi was always been seen as a pretty good one for just about everything. There were spots where chargers could play safely, there were spots where mid, short, long range all could excel on this map in all of the modes. So I'm actually surprised that it didn't make it in, and it's probably due to it just probably was something technical. If I had to guess, something with the transformation might have been not as easy to code or figure out on the Switch, and they didn't have enough time to finish it, as Resort does still exist somewhat in the game's code even to this day, or at least it was referenced in the code for a long time. So they must have been working on it, but scrapped it. But it is something I would like to see in Splatoon 3, purely because it is still the only pure transformation stage. And now moving on to the B tier, we lead in with Urchin Underpass. This is probably the most iconic map in all of Splatoon, because it was the first map we ever actually got to see, and was the first map to actually get a rework, as early Urchin Underpass was really bad, like really bad, to the point where the entrance to even the middle of the map could be blocked by a single splash wall. Yep, it was that bad, where just a single splash wall would block it. So they had to rework it. It was the first rework that ever occurred in Splatoon 1, and I feel like it sort of got better. It was a better map after the rework, and overall the map was still generally received pretty well. In fact, a lot of people considered Walleye Warehouse to be like the final destination of Splatoon, but I would argue even in Splatoon 1, it might have actually been Urchin Underpass. The map was more or less really balanced, and after the rework, it was super open and super easy to get to mid. It was super easy to get in, control of glass. It was just a pretty well-balanced map, and it's weird that it didn't get ported. Probably because it is a little too generic and too simple, that, you know, they had something like the Reef that was going to fill that same sort of simple, basic cookie cutter map. And that probably is why it didn't make it. Urchin Underpass really is a pretty basic cookie cutter map. There really isn't a whole lot going on to it. It doesn't really have anything special. But the reason I put it so high, well, granted, not high, but the reason I put it here is because it is just a pretty iconic map for what it is, and something that I felt was received pretty well. And I'd actually like to see it come back. Now we're getting into the real hot take territory here. I actually don't have Salt Spray Rig in the bottom tier. Yeah, I know what people are thinking. Well, why isn't it in the bottom tier? Salt Spray Rig actually had 2 of its 3 modes soft banned from rotation. So why do I have it not the bottom? And it's simple. They can fix it. The biggest problem with Salt Spray Rig isn't the old meme of it being, you know, favored towards one team because of Peeker's advantage or anything like that. That was just a long-running meme that never actually was really relevant. I think the biggest problem Rig had was that the entire map is so cramped that it is essentially one giant choke point through the entirety of the map. And that is just really bad. That is single-handedly the worst aspect of Rig, is how cramped everything is and how small all the movement space is, that it is so easy to hold areas, hold spots, and prevent approaching, to where they did soft ban 2 of the 3 ranked modes. It only can be played in Splat Zones in rotation, and that's just pretty insane. Of course, it seems as if the map was probably not designed with the other two modes in mind, as in both Tower Control and Rainmaker, it is possible to get into the enemy spawn and spawn camp, where the spawn camp, well, your spawn area, is, once again, a choke point. It is not the best designed map in the entirety of the game, but it is something that they could fix. Much like how they widened some of the spots in Moray Towers, they could do the same with Rig, and it would greatly improve the quality of the map. Add some ink rails, add literally anything. I don't have it at the bottom because it's not an unsalvageable piece of garbage. It is something they could fix and they could make decent, and that this is something I'd hope they would do. They would hope that they would fix it to some degree, because if they were, that would remove the real big problems with the map, is just make it less cramped. Moving right along is the last one in the B tier, and another hotly debated map, Bluefin Depot. Now this is a weird map, because I feel like this with Moray Towers were the maps in Splatoon 1 that the rank that you played at drastically changed how the map was played. And that's down to chargers. I mentioned earlier that chargers were super good in Splatoon 1 for those that didn't play it, and Bluefin Depot and Moray Towers were the sole examples of how good chargers are, or were, and how oppressive they were. And so when you got higher in ranks, more and more chargers would start to appear on these maps and drastically change how the map was played. But the farther down you go, then chargers just didn't exist. This is one of the few maps that I would argue that it came down to how good your charger was. In fact, I would argue more so than Moray Towers. Moray Towers was a meme for the high-level players basically just waiting for their E-leader to get the first shot on the other E-leader, or to get a pick on someone else and start the whole fight. I'd argue Bluefin Depot was probably worse than that. In fact, some higher level teams actually started running double charger on Bluefin because of how good it could be at just negating movement. With the way the map was designed, a charger could sit at various positions and basically deny half of the map. Now, what you'd be arguing, like, hey, well, old chargers in Splatoon 1 could deny the entirety of the map on Moray, so how is Bluefin worse? Well, it's simply because they could also deny the other half of the map. Depending on the position and the mode that was being played, a charger could deny the entirety of Bluefin Depot, and you'd be stuck on your side of the map. And if the team played double charger, like I had mentioned some higher level teams were doing, they could just straight up deny you any presence on the map. Now, it sounds like I'm ragging on a whole lot, so why do I not have it at the bottom? And it's basically just because it is a pretty interesting map. Now, I would argue it is still flawed, but I feel like this and Moray Towers were always the quintessential charger map, and I feel like it'd be a crime to not have something that's also, again, charger-centric. This is the ideal map for higher level chargers to show off their skill with their positionings and shots and the angles they could get. So I definitely think this and Moray Towers are probably the most iconic maps when it comes to charger play, at least for higher level players like I was at the time. So I would definitely want it back, not because of me, God no, not because of me, but because of the players that I know, the charger players, the people that loved this map. It's flawed for sure, but I know that there are a lot of people out there that would like to have this map back just because they know how good it was to play charger there. And finally, sitting alone at the bottom rank, we have Museum. Now, some people might be trying to argue against me here. Some people might be typing a comment about why I'm wrong, but this map is just so boring. The whole gimmick behind Museum were the spinning platforms. The problem is that they were basically irrelevant in anything that wasn't like Rainmaker. The whole spinners were just irrelevant in Splat Zones. The middle spinner just didn't do anything in Splat Zones. The whole gimmick of the map didn't have any sort of relevancy in the map. And when you have this whole gimmick, what's the point? It was a boring map that had a gimmick that did nothing. It was just not good. Not good at all. The splat zones on it was alright, but the zone was super small and super easy to contest. Like, even a single burst bomb could contest the zone on there. It was just not good. And then it also contained the most notorious camping spot for the Rainmaker, which would require the enemy to go through your spawn to get it back if you did camp it. And while there is some, I remember there was some like super weird bubbler jump that you could do to still get it. Most teams would not sacrifice a bubbler just to get the Rainmaker. And I just don't think it's a good map. I just don't like Museum at all. It was super boring, super simple. Its gimmick was irrelevant to the map. I just didn't think it was good at all. So with all those actual tiers out of the way, now I'm not going to go into all of them, but looking back at the maps that already got ported into Splatoon 2, what of these maps do I want back in Splatoon 3? And basically all I can really say is, out of the ones that did get ported, the only ones I'm pretty sure people would not argue against coming back are probably Walleye Warehouse and Camp Triggerfish. Those two maps are probably the most well received out of any map in both games. Walleye Warehouse, as I mentioned before, was often referred to as the final destination, the simple go-to map for most teams. And it's just as iconic as Underpass is. And then Camp Triggerfish, while in Splatoon 2 it has started to get a little bit of a worse rep than it ever had in Splatoon 1, it is still often regarded as one of the better maps in the entire game, especially with high-level splat zones, because it's always been a balancing act of figuring out which zone to focus, having your team split up, having comps that play around basically always being a 2v2 instead of a 4v4. I felt like the dynamic the map played was always super interesting. And those two are the ones I would actually like to see come back again. Now, with all that being said, I want to hear what everyone else has to say. Do you agree with my tiers? Do you want to change some stuff? Do you think I was wrong somewhere? I'd actually be interested to see what people think and what other people would actually want in favor. For those that might be wondering now, looking at the whole list, what are the actual ones I want? Now, I would say it's just the first two tiers. I would like Hammerhead Bridge, Flounder Heights, and Mahi Resort to come back. Those are my surefire I want these maps back, with the B tier being maps that I would like back, but I would be perfectly fine with them not being there, and then C being the ones I don't want. So I want to hear everyone else's opinions, everyone else's thoughts. Feel free to leave them below. And with that is this video. So I want to thank you all for watching, and I will see you all next time.